in reform movements. Okay, let's go to the thought bubble. Reform movements were open to women partly because if women were supposed to be the moral center of the home, they could also claim to be the moral conscience of the nation. Thus, it didn't seem out of the ordinary for women to become active in the movement to build asylums for the mentally ill, for instance, as Dorothea Dix was, or to take the lead in sobering the men of America. Many of the most famous advocates for legally prohibiting the sale of alcohol in the U.S. were women, like Carrie Nation attacked bars with a hatchet, and not because she'd had a few too many. The somewhat less radical Frances Willard founded the Women's Christian Temperance Union in 1874, which would be one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the United States by the end of the 19th century. And women gave many temperance lectures featuring horror stories of men who, rather than seeking refuge from the harsh competition of the market economy and the loving embrace of their homes, found solace at the bottom of a glass or at the end of a beer hose. And by the way, yes, there were bars that allowed you to drink as much beer as you could from a hose for a nickel. Today, these establishments are known as frat houses. These temperance lectures would tell of men spending all their hard-earned money on drink, leaving wives and children, there were always children, starving and freezing because in the world of the temperance lecture, it was always winter. Now, don't get me wrong, prohibition was a disaster because one, freedom, and two, it's the only time we had to amend the Constitution to be like, just kidding about that other amendment. But it's worth remembering that back then people drank way more than we do now, and also that alcohol is probably a greater public health issue than some recreational drugs that remain illegal. But regardless, the temperance movement made a huge difference in American life because eventually male and female supporters of temperance realized that women would be a more powerful ally against alcohol if they could vote. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So in 1928, critic Gilbert Seldes wrote that if prohibition had existed in 1800, the suffragists might have remained for another century a scattered group of intellectual cranks. And to quote another historian, the most urgent reasons for women to want to vote in the mid-1800s were alcohol-related. They wanted the saloons closed down, or at least regulated. They wanted the right to own property and to shield their family's financial security from the profligacy of drunken husbands. They wanted the right to divorce those men and to have them arrested for wife-beating and to protect children from being terrorized by them. To do all these things, they needed to change the laws that consigned married women to the status of chattel, and to change those laws